First story. OP turned into a rageful monster after his wife cheated on him, ruined her affair partner's life, and started ruining women's lives who cheat on their husbands with him, after he tricked them into sleeping with him while torturing his wife and himself. A true psychopath origin. I know I'm a monster. I 32M am not here for forgiveness or advice, nor do I care about any condemnation from anyone. I am cold-hearted and evil. Nothing you say will affect me in any way. Maybe this is more of a warning that there are people like me out there. It's been about 3 years since my D-Day. My wife 33F had started to act shady, and I was researching methods to monitor her phone and computer. I wanted to try to gather some solid evidence. While I was doing that, I opened a letter I got the day before. In it, there's a speeding ticket, together with a picture of my wife in her car with the coworker I was suspicious about. Examining the date, I soon figured out this was the time she was supposed to be at a work seminar. So there was no longer any doubt about what was going on. The following Friday, my wife had her usual 3-4 glasses of wine to wind down from the week's work. I put half a crushed sleeping tablet in her last class, and she was out cold. Yes, I drugged her to find out the truth. I don't apologize for it. I opened her phone with her thumbprint and started going through it. I installed spyware and downloaded everything. There wasn't anything conclusive there, except for some strange messages back and forth with her coworker, always talking about some presentation. It looked like they were presenting stuff 24/7. I figured there must be something else, maybe a different app, or maybe a separate phone. I looked everywhere, and finally I found a phone in the glove box of her car. I opened it the same way, and this was the motherlode of evidence. Again, I copied everything and installed spyware. I woke up the kids 4 and 6. I left 2 phones on the table in front of her with a post-it note simply saying, "I know everything." I took the kids to my parents, told them what was going on, and that I would be gone for a while. Since I had been suspicious of my wife, I had already lined up a lawyer, new bank accounts, and so on. Over the next week, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation by getting all the paperwork ready for several eventualities. I had 1 set of papers for a clean-cut divorce, a post-nup, in case we ended up discussing reconciliation, and so on. The pain of the situation was unbearable, but I knew what this was. I knew what I needed to do. I could not show any weakness or doubt. I had to be in control. Over the course of the week, my wife was panicking more and more, sending hundreds of messages and missing calls, and she would get everybody around her to try to call me as well. I simply ignored all of it. I put the phone in a drawer and got on with what I knew I had to do. When I was ready, I sent a message to my wife that I would be over to talk in the afternoon. When I arrived, she was an absolute mess. As soon as I came through the door, she fell to her knees in front of me and begged for a second chance and forgiveness. I was having none of it. I pulled my legs from her grip and just said, "Let's sit and talk." It probably took her good 15 minutes to make it to the kitchen table. I showed no emotion. As soon as she was seated, she noticed I was not wearing my wedding ring. Then I gave her the documents for divorce. She broke down for 20 minutes just sobbing. I said nothing, and when she was finally able to speak again, she said she would do anything to save our marriage. I pulled the divorce papers back and gave her the post-nup. She was sobbing again. I read slowly through my copy. Basically, it said I could divorce her for any reason I deemed fit. She would get nothing from me. She will get half of what she was entitled to, but no child support, no alimony, none of my pension, and none of my savings. The custody would be 50-50. She signed it right away. I told her she should probably get a lawyer and run the agreement by them before she gave it back to me. She said she didn't need to. I told her if she wanted to change something, that I was open to discussing it the next 2 weeks. I never actually used the spyware for anything, but I have been able to verify that she has never again been in contact with her affair partner. Then I told her she had to write down a complete timeline and that I knew almost everything. If I caught her in a lie or omission, now or at a later date, the outcome would be immediate divorce. I gave her a week to type it out and left. A week later, she sent me a large file that detailed everything, including her excuses and justifications. I told her to get ready to go out. I printed out a hard copy and went over to our house to pick her up. I drove her straight to her affair partner's house and parked in the driveway. She was in total panic at this point, asking me what we were doing there. I gave her the hard copy and told her, "You are going to go confess what you've done to his wife." She started hyperventilating. I don't remember exactly what it was she said, but it was something along the lines of, "I can't do this to him. or something like that. I took the hard copy back, started the car, and drove down the road of 5-6 blocks to the closest bus stop. At this point, I was so angry I was fuming. I commanded her to get the F out of the car. She refused, saying, "Let's talk, please. We can work this out." I guess my facial expressions said it all. She shut up and stared at me. She didn't know what to do. I told her very calmly, "You just had the choice between your affair partner and your family. And you just chose your affair partner. It's not like I'm leaving you beaten and bloody in a ditch. This is a bus stop. You're a grown woman, and I'm sure you can figure it out. Now get the F out of the car." My tone really left no wiggle room. She got out and asked, "What happens now?" I just drove off so hard that it slammed the door shut. I turned around and drove straight back to the affair partner's house. I could see my wife starting to run towards me, and I could hear her yelling in the distance as she understood what was going on. I was going to tell the affair partner's wife. It turns out his wife was 5 months pregnant. She started crying loudly when she read my wife's timeline. Her husband came running around the corner, only to freeze for a second before he bolted through the house and out the back door as soon as he recognized me. His wife later divorced him and really did a number on him in court. Anyway, at home, my wife was panicking and begging while I packed some things and left. On the way out, I told her that her confessing to the wife was a test. It was a test to see if she was over her affair partner and if she really took ownership of what she had done. She failed the test, and now that I had told his wife, my wife's chance to make me consider if reconciliation was even possible, that chance was gone, and there was no way of turning back time. As a result of her adultery, we would divorce. I rented a small, cheap house outside of town. More of a cabin, actually. It had a water heater and lights, but very little electrical heating. The main heat source was one of those cast iron fireplaces. It was in the middle of winter with -15 degrees C at night, so I pretty much had to keep the fire going or the house would get very cold. Over the next few days in the cabin, my mind just crashed, and I started drinking very heavily. Even soaked in alcohol, the pain was simply unbearable. At one point, I decided to end it. I loaded my shotgun, put it in my mouth, and pulled the trigger with my toe. It just went click. The goddamn shell was a dud. I drank even harder after that. The next few days are sort of a blur. A few days later, when I woke up in a pool of my own puke, blood, and waste, I had a concussion, and I also had terrible pain in my arm and chest. I was hypothermic and severely dehydrated. It took me a minute to figure out that I had fallen on top of my whiskey bottle and smashed it. Glass jars was sticking out of my arm and chest. When I finally made it to the bathroom, I saw I had a dark purple-black eye, so I probably banged my head on the floor pretty badly. Somehow I managed to clean myself up a bit. I changed out of my filthy clothes. Not that it mattered much. After I pulled the glass bits out, it didn't take long for everything to be covered in blood. I wasn't really all there, but somehow I figured out that I needed to call an ambulance. I went outside to wait for them, but I was unconscious by the time they arrived. My wife was still listed as my emergency contact, and I guess someone called her at some point. She was there when I woke up. She was talking constantly. I said nothing, not a single word. I went back to my little frozen cabin and spent the next 3 weeks healing up. During this time, I started to realize that something was seriously broken inside of me. I didn't really feel anything. I didn't even miss or feel love for my kids. Eventually, I moved back into the guest room. My wife started going to church and became a devout Christian. I sort of continued to exist in limbo. I felt no connection to anybody. Started counseling, tried various prescription drugs, all kinds of treatments. I even tried acupuncture. Nothing helped. One evening, I went out to get out of the house. There was a group of women at the restaurant. They were clearly on a girls' night out or something. We got to talking. One of them was flirting pretty heavily with me. I could see from the indentation on her finger that she normally had a wedding ring, so I knew she was married. We ended up at a hotel doing the deed. While she was asleep, I opened her phone. She had Face ID. It didn't take me long to confirm she was married, a family with 3 kids. I copied her husband's contact details and took a selfie of the 2 of us in bed. I got dressed, and I sent a picture to her husband along with a message apologizing. But I also lied and told him his wife had told me that this wasn't the first time she did this. Then I woke her up and told her what I'd done. The pain in her eyes, the panic finally, I felt something. It was terrible, but at least I felt something. When I came home, I told my wife what I had done. I told her in a way where I tried to hurt her as much as possible. Again, the pain on her face. I felt something again. I felt terrible. But at least I felt something. Now I do this on a regular basis. Every 3 to 4 weeks I go out and pick up a married woman who wants to cheat for some reason. I've become really good at gathering the evidence. Often I get video of it. Sometimes I will turn it into an affair that lasts for weeks. But in the end, I always present the evidence to their husbands. I don't know how many families have broken up at this point. I know it's effing evil. But I just can't help myself. It's compulsive. I can't stop myself. I always also hurt my wife, on purpose, every single time. Either I tell her as painfully as possible, or I will leave a used condom wrapper in my pocket. I have even had some of the women write me love notes that I intentionally left in my pocket for my wife to find. I've had a few more self-harm attempts over the years, but I just can't do it. At one point, an angry husband pulled a gun and aimed it at my head. I put my forehead on the muzzle, smiled, and asked him to please do me the favor. But he never pulled the trigger. He just started crying. My existence is torture, and I just don't have the strength to end it. I am still married, and I know what I am doing is wrong on every level. I don't know how I ended up like this. The doctors don't seem to have a diagnosis for me either. My wife's affair broke me on a fundamental level. Or maybe I killed off part of my brain when I smashed it into the floor in that cabin. Anyway, be warned, I am out there. Edit. I know I can't really blame my wife for this at this point. I can blame her for the beginning, but my continued general SHT-tiness is on me. I can't really change it at this point. I hope to be able to at some point in the future. Second story. After becoming besties with my boss, I just found out she is actually my biological mom who kicked me out for adoption. We'll go with Janet for me F24, and we'll call her Bess F40. I always knew I was adopted out of foster care. My parents M48, F51 couldn't have biological kids, so they signed up to foster, and I, along with my sister Wendy F28, were both foster fails. Yes, like with cats. I sometimes joke about that with my mom, because we also had 3 cats growing up for the same reason. I'm athletic and have a lot of hobbies. Rock climbing, hiking, martial arts, working on my taekwondo belt. I don't have it yet, but I enjoy classes and lifting weights a fair bit. Wendy and my parents do not share my interest there, but we do all like reading, so we bonded over that. I still remember being 4 and Wendy being 9, and us both in bed with mom as she read from Watership Down or Shardik. I'm not saying we weren't a weird family, but to this day I love them all. They're my tribe, and if we're weird, at least we're weird together. Life was what you might expect for a former foster kid, ups and downs. I went to the local state university with my parents' help, just like Wendy did. I played lacrosse and met Andrew M25, who became my best friend, and eventually I got a job at a bank, mostly just filing and doing paperwork for people with titles like senior analyst. I won't say it's my dream job, but it pays pretty decently, and Andrew and I have been considering moving in together. We're dating now after my then GF broke up with me to move to Alaska. Last year, after I'd worked there for 3 months, Bess came to work at the same building as me. She was head of the division and oversaw investment accounts and trusts. I didn't meet her right away, until I was assigned a very boring, but apparently necessary job to collect all the paperwork we had on accounts from before our current bank overlord's absorption of whatever bank was here before. She was surprisingly cool, and we bonded over stuff like hiking and rock climbing. I honestly have never met anyone else who knew who Alex Honnold was outside of people I already knew from climbing, much less shared my opinion that he's kind of hot. And soon I was one of her favorite minions. I'm not saying we were best buds, but we got along. Her husband Dave M44 died last year of cancer, and while she was on leave, I used to stop by her place with little things, coffee, some shopping for necessities, or just to hang out and check up on her. She has family, a mom and dad. They're not super close, but she's been making fences with them, and since Dave passed, they've been visiting her too. I even ran into them once or twice, and her mom acted kind of weird when we met and asked me like 6 times if we'd met before. I remember telling Andrew, and he said, "Well, Janie, you're over 6 feet and built like a really hot dump truck, so maybe you just stand out," which is why I love him. Yes, I love being called a hot dump truck. When she came back to work 6 months ago, things were a little different. Not in a bad way, just that I was more comfortable with her and more willing to talk about my own life and listen to her talk about hers. She kind of became a mentor. She knows I don't really love the job and don't want to go back for a business degree or economics or what have you. But she appreciates how I don't do sloppy work. For my part, as I got to know Bess, I really started to respect her. I found out the reason she and her family were on the outs was because she'd gotten pregnant when she was 15. And since they were all really Catholic, and it was the late 90s in Massachusetts, she didn't feel like she could get an abortion. Also, they wouldn't let her keep the kid. They threatened to kick her out if she'd tried. I have no idea if they could have legally done that or not. So she gave up her kid, cried a lot, ran away from home, ended up with her grandmother, and rebuilt her life. Went to college, got a degree, then a master's, started working at an investment firm, met and married Dave. She'd really sad they didn't have a kid. And now that she's 40, she doesn't think she'll ever have one. We started having hangout nights, once or twice a week at most. We'd talk a little about work, her life, my life, and how everything starts in foster care. We started being gym buddies because she needed an outlet for her emotions over Dave, and I didn't want to let her go get gawked at by meatheads by herself. Honestly, I was starting to worry that we were catching feelings. I would never cheat on Andrew, but if Bess and I were getting too close, I'd have to stop being friends, and that'd suck because I'm kind of difficult. I'm very ADHD, and so I have a lot of walls, and it's rare for me to make real, close friends. For my birthday 2 years ago, Wendy and I decided to do 23andMe and ancestry tests. We've always been curious about where and who we come from. She ended up connecting with some half-siblings and finding out some stuff about herself. But I didn't have anyone come up at the time. I still log on and check from time to time. Anyway, yesterday morning, as I was puttering around the apartment, making toast for myself and Andrew, and getting ready to go for a run, I decided to do my usual email and website surfing on the tablet. One of my emails was from 23andMe, the usual, you have X number of relatives thing. I go in, and reading it, I realize these people counselors all have the same name as Bess' mom and dad. Bess took Dave's name when they married. I hadn't seen them before, and I figure maybe they were recently signed up or whatever. I went for my run, and it was nagging at me. Bess and I have similar looking faces, oval, pointed chin, wide jaw. My eyes are green while hers are blue, and my hair is a different color, although we both dye, so who knows, and we're both really into physical hobbies. And then there's the way her mom acted when we met. When I got home from my run, Bets called me. It's been fairly warm, just shy of 80, so I was toweling off and had my tablet open and remembered the email. I asked Bess about the people I'd been linked up to, and she affirmed that they were her cousins and asked me why I was asking. It doesn't reflect well on me that it didn't even occur to me why it would have matched me up with Bess' cousins until she asked why I was asking. I was standing there, towel over my shoulders, phone on speaker on the counter, and I was staring at it while the gears in my head began to slowly grind their way to realizing what I was about to say and what it might mean. I stammered my way through an explanation of how I'd signed up for 23andMe years ago, and how this morning it sent me an email telling me I was related to the people I just asked her about. She got really quiet and asked me to email her a copy, which I did. She then read it, said she'd call me back, and for the next 2 hours I kind of ambled around the house like a very confused hot dump truck, with Andrew trying to console me. I wasn't upset, but I was completely unsure if I should be or not. About 3 hours later, Bess called me back and asked me if I could come over. I asked if Andrew could come too because, frankly, I was pretty zoned out and didn't want to be without him, and she said yes. When I got there, Bess had dug out all these boxes of stuff. She had access to adoption records, you can request them in Massachusetts, and knew her baby was adopted out to a couple in North Littleborough. I called my mom, and she checked up on what she had, and it turned out that I was surrendered to the foster care system when my parents died in a car accident when I was 2. They didn't have any relatives, and I was their only kid. We sit there with this for a while. Bess is trying really hard not to cry, and I honestly have no idea what to feel. I wasn't even really seriously looking for biofamily, you know? It was a goof I did with Wendy. Andrew is nice enough to go get us coffee and donuts at the local Dunkin', and so we're sitting in the kitchen, looking at the box of stuff. She has pictures of a baby. Is it me? I don't know. It looks as much like me as any naturally pale white baby might. We decided we'd get tested. It could take a couple of weeks to get the results back. So until then we can't be sure. Maybe I'm related to her cousins through some other relative somewhere. Maybe it's just a weird coincidence. Part of me is terrified. I don't want my mom and dad to think I wasn't happy with them as my parents, or that I was looking to replace them. They worked really hard for me and Wendy, and I always knew they loved me and I was safe with them. I will not let that change. But Bess and I have become really close. And is it weird to say that I'm also worried that finding out I'm her kid will ruin that? I don't know. We're going in for cheek swabs on Wednesday. She cried a lot, and I held her hand. And I'm starting to realize how badly Bess has wanted her daughter back all these years, and I have no idea if I'm up for that. I know from her end, she was forced to give her child up and forced to go on without knowing where she was. But from my end, my life was pretty great without her, minus those 2 years in foster care. I do really like and respect Bess, but I don't know if I can go from friends to family, if that makes sense. Anyway, yeah, I took the day off work. I think my boss will understand. Edit. Just got back from my parents' house. They were super cool about everything and told me they just want me to be happy and safe. And since they know Bess is my boss at work and gym friend, they're pretty sure this isn't some weird scam or a desire for a kidney. That led to them arguing for 10 minutes about how Bess could possibly have somehow gotten 23andMe to connect me up with her cousins. And why wouldn't she just connect herself and me directly if she was going to do that? Then they hugged me for an hour and told me it would all be okay. And Bess probably doesn't have one of those Mission Impossible mask machines or ceiling harnesses. I really love my mom and dad. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I guess I kind of stink at detail. You'd think something this long, I'd have gotten it all in. But before I turned 2, I ended up in foster care. I don't actually know if they died or what. That's just what my mom remembered when I asked her about it. The details match up. My mom even showed me the paperwork from the DCYF. I had always assumed they were my biological parents, but now I don't know. Thank you for watching the video. If you are interested in listening to these kinds of stories, we've got more in store for you. Simply subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share it with your friends.